Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm James, and this video I'm continuing on with kind of looking at this Saito FA-62B, which is powering this Hangar 9 Piper Cub. It's a 40 class Piper Cub, and I've had a couple videos out now on this subject where I've been kind of tinkering with the engine. I had an issue. I've had this engine about 3 years and it's been running great, and then more recently I've had some trouble with it kind of running mid-flight, kind of cutting out on me. And I had a couple of videos where one of them the first one I took the tank out and I checked the tank. I didn't find any problem with the tank or the lines. And then the last video I did on this, I pulled the glow plug and looked at the glow plug, and the glow plug looked kind of weak, so I changed the glow plug. And in this video what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and adjust the valves. I'm going to check the valve gap, and that's what I'm going to be doing here. And then after that, the next video after this one, I'm going to get this thing running and see if I can just basically get it tuned back up again, and then we'll go out to the field with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull off the rocker arm covers here, and then get into it from there. One thing I wanted to note is that I don't have the most sophisticated kind of recording and equipment doing this channel, and I have a little bit of a challenge with my audio. Sometimes you'll notice in my videos the audio will change, and I've been sort of experimenting with a different sort of mic setup. Again, I'm not using expensive stuff, so bear with me. You know, if you kind of hear the quality kind of change here and there, it's probably because of that. And I'm hoping one day, if this channel kind of continues on, maybe I'll invest in a little bit better kind of equipment. But for right now, I'm just going to kind of use what I have on hand. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to flip this thing over, and so I can get to it, and I'm going to pull these rocker arm covers off, and then we'll get moving on checking the valve lash. And clean some of the oil off. So one thing about having an engine mounted sort of inverted, this one isn't completely inverted, it's kind of angled, but it is angled downward, so the oil sort of accumulate toward the head of the engine and at the glow plug, and also back here in the rocker arms and the valves. So it sort of builds up in there. All right, so here we go. Let's take a look at some of the parts here. So the valve is going to be right below here. You're not going to actually see the valve itself. And this is the retaining spring assembly that kind of keeps the valve set down inside the head there. And actually it's spring loaded to have the valves be closed. And then they get opened when the rocker arm sort of basically pushes down on them. That's how the valves open up. So as we move this around, you kind of see it work. You'll see each one kind of go up separately. Okay, so what's happening is basically you have the crankshaft is rotating, it's engaging the cam gear, which is in this sort of like this little gearbox here. The cam gear is engaging or pushing these push rods up and down. They're moving up and down along the cam gear. Those then push on the rocker arm, and this kind of back portion of the rocker arm, then it rocks, and that's what pushes the valve up and down. So it's all synchronized, it's all timed, so we're not going to adjust anything except the gap that is between the rocker arm here and sort of like the valve. I guess it's the back of the valve stem, or the end of the valve stem, which is down basically in here. So there's a little gap in here that we obviously can't see, but we're going to be able to measure it. And then the adjustments are made. There's a little lock nut. This is the adjusting screw right here. It's a little hex, kind of like a socket head. And we loosen up the lock nut. That loosens up this little screw, and then we adjust it this way, you know, clockwise or counterclockwise, and then that's going to be pretty much how it engages or touches the push rod down in here. So the length of basically how far you screw it in or out is going to be how far kind of the related gap is going to be back over here on this side. All right, so to kind of make a little more sense about what I just sort of stumbled through just right now, here's a diagram. This is again from the manual showing the tappet adjustment. So right over here is this is the lock nut and the adjusting screw, which touches or engages the push rod, and that's right over here. And there's the top of this is the adjusting screw, and then the lock nut. It's kind of hard to see. And then on the other side, jump over to this side over here, that's where the gap is actually going to be measured using a feeler gauge, and that's the gap between the rocker arm and then the I guess they're calling it a tappet for the valve, but it's just basically the valve stem right in there. So that's kind of where the adjustment's going to be. What we're going to be adjusting is this gap right here by screwing in or out this screw right here and then locking it down. All right, so per the Saito manual, the maximum valve gap is going to be 1/10 of a millimeter, 0.1 millimeter. That's the max. And that's the maximum this is going to be open. If it gets beyond that, then it's going to be too far open. It's going to be really out of adjustment. But and they give you this little feeler gauge when you buy the engine, and this is basically that thickness. It's 1/10 of a millimeter. Now, but the adjustment, that's sort of what the max is, but the adjustment is actually going to be, the ideal range is going to be 0.03 to 0.1 millimeter, which is roughly equivalent to, I guess it's 2/1000ths of an inch to 4/1000ths of an inch. And that's what we're going to use our feeler gauge for, is trying to get somewhere in that mid-range there. Okay, so for this one right now, I'm just going to go ahead and choose my 0.003 size, and I'll go with that one. Now these are very, very thin. They're almost, well, they're like paper. All right, so now we have to rotate the engine to the right setting, the right location. And that's going to be, again, your top dead center on the compression stroke. And what I thought I would do is I got a little diagram. If I can kind of zoom out a little bit. Yeah, let me go ahead and change my camera here. Or let me move this out of the way. All right, so I hope I can kind of explain this the way I kind of look at it. Again, I'm not trying to be Mr. Mechanics here, but so I just downloaded just a basic diagram of a 4-stroke engine, how they kind of work. So of course we have our different strokes. We have the intake, compression, power, and exhaust. So what happens is, you know, on the intake stroke, the piston's going down, and of course the intake valve is opening up, and that's allowing fuel to be kind of sucked into the chamber, into the cylinder. And at the same time, the exhaust valve is shut, right? And that kind of keeps it sealed. And then on the compression stroke, the piston starts coming back up, and it reaches top dead center, which is basically the highest point that the piston travels in its motion. And that's going to be the top dead center. At that point in time, the valves are supposed to be sealed. They're supposed to be closed, completely closed. If they weren't, obviously you wouldn't get the compression you need. And then during the power stroke, obviously the thing fires. This shows a spark plug, but we have a glow plug, obviously. So again, it fires, the piston is driven down, and again, the valves are shut during the power stroke, because that's how you gain the power. And then what happens is in the exhaust stroke, the piston starts coming back up again, the intake valve is shut, and the exhaust valve is opening up, and then all the exhaust is expelled out of the cylinder. And then the whole thing starts over again. So, but there's also going to be 2 top dead centers. There's a top dead center on compression, which is this one, and there's going to be a top dead center on the exhaust. So you don't want to do, so we have to find that, we have to find this one and make sure we're adjusting on the compression side and not on the exhaust side, or the exhaust stroke, I should say. Okay, hope that makes a little bit of sense. All right, so just to mention a few things about this, you know, why do we want to have a gap here in the first place? You know, why didn't they just make this engine so that it just connected directly to the valve? And sort of the reasons that I think about, or the reasons that I kind of understand it, is one of them is because as the engine heats up, it's going to expand. I mean, the parts are going to expand as they get hot. And if you had this, they had no gap here, say it connected just connected to it, or basically was right up against it. As the engine heated up, that gap would close. And there's a possibility that if that gap is closing and that it's too tight, then there's a possibility that the valve or the valves are not going to close completely. Now, imagine if it's out of whack like that and and they're not closing completely. What's going to happen sort of during these different strokes? So, for example, let's say that they're not closing all the way, and there's a little bit of gap in these two valves, or one of them. So as the fuel gets sucked in, first of all, if you have a little bit of a gap in the exhaust valve, then you're not going to get like a full sort of like vacuum and pulling in the amount of air fuel mixture that you need, right? Because some of it's going to be sucked in from the exhaust side. So that's one example. The other thing is when your compression stroke starts or is going on, you're going to be compressing in here, but you're also going to be you may be losing some material or some gas out of the sides of the valves, right? It's going to be going into the exhaust or going back into the intake side. And then carrying on, obviously, during the power stroke, when this thing fires off, you're not going to have full force pushing down the piston. You're going to be losing some of that through your valves. So, and then also, I think what could happen is if you do have a small gap in your valves, especially on the power stroke here, you can kind of burn or pit these sort of like surfaces in here, the faces in there, and that could damage the valves and that type of thing. So, what else? So, let's say that they're too loose. Let's say that they're too loose. So if they're way too loose, they're way out of adjustment, and you have way too big of a gap in here, then what's going to happen is as the push rod comes up, you first have to sort of get rid of this gap, right? The movement has to, basically this amount of play has to be taken out of the system before it engages the valve, right? So if this is too loose, the push rod is going to have to travel further before it actually starts pushing down over here on the valve, right? So what does that mean? That means that the valve, like for example, the intake valve, is going to open later, right? And then because the motion's already this motion is sort of finite because it's going to start going back down pretty soon, you're going to have a limited amount of time, and the valve, because it started late, it's not going to be open as long, and it's also not going to be open as far as it should. So what that's going to result in, if you go back to your diagram here, what that's going to result in is you're not going to have as much air of the mixture coming in. Basically, the valve's going to start late opening. It's not going to open as far as it should, and then it's going to close sooner than it should. And the same thing will happen on the exhaust side. So think about the exhaust side, is that it's going to open late, and it's not going to be open as long, and then it's going to not open as much. So the whole system sort of gets a little bit out of whack. And so that's why you want to make sure that these are adjusted properly, because otherwise your engine performance will degrade. So if it's really out of whack, the engine's not going to run right. But usually what happens, probably nine times out of 10, these are just off a little bit. They're just slightly off, and maybe the engine performance is a little low. So then we just have to go periodically and check them out. All right, so now to find the top dead center. So first of all, let's just go ahead and take a look and kind of see what's going on here. So I can feel, this is my compression right now. I can feel as I turn the engine over. So what happens is the piston comes up and I get that compression, and sort of at the top dead center, somewhere right about in here, both of these valves are going to be closed. They're going to be shut, and there should be a little bit of play in the rocker arm, and that's the gap that we're seeing right there. So that little bit of gap, and then what that means is that means that the valves are completely closed. If one of these was tight, then that could indicate that the valve was not completely closed. And if it was really, really loose, then of course we have those other problems that we talked about. So as we move through, we'll see, so the piston's moving down now, and then all of a sudden what's going to happen is the exhaust valve is going to open. That's our exhaust stroke. And as it opens up, the piston then comes up and starts pushing, obviously pushing the exhaust out of the cylinder. And then it starts moving its way back down again. As it starts to move down, we're on the intake stroke, and the intake valve opens up over here. You kind of see it opening up. let some more fuel in, and then we're back to our compression again. So let's just, here's the movement here kind of quicker. Intake, compression, then our power, and the exhaust, and then back to our intake again. All right, so I'm going to show you now how I find top dead center. So what I do is first of all, I'm going to pull my glow plug out carefully. I'm going to be real careful with glow plugs. Get this off of here. Don't want to strip it. Okay, there she is. Now when I did that, now I'm not going to feel anything in here because the glow plug's out. I'm not going to feel compression at all. So I'm going to have to kind of go back and look at it, see what the valves are doing. So as I turn this around, there goes my exhaust goes in, my intake goes in. So now I'm going to be closing up, and there's sort of my top dead center, like right in here, right? Well, I guess right about here somewhere. There's my top dead center. These are loose. So what I'm going to do though is that I'm going to take a Q-tip, something like this guy, because it's soft, and I'm going to cut off the ends like this. And this is just going to be sort of still going to take a little bit of sort of like judgment. And I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to put it in here inside of my cylinder like this. And when I go, you can see my finger moving up. So I'm pressing on it so you can kind of feel the piston, right, is going. Here's the top right about there. There's the top right about there. And because it's angled, I got to be a little bit careful. Right about there is the top, and then it's going to start going back down again. Kind of see that. And then come back up, and I kind of feel it. So I can kind of move. Hopefully you see that action right there. I can kind of move this up and down, right, like this, and kind of feel where the top dead center is. Like I can feel it go up. And you'll notice that these guys really aren't moving. The valves really aren't moving because I'm sort of in that little range right there. Now, what I do is I mark a little spot on my Q-tip like that. What I'll do is I'll just play with this until I get to basically I can kind of see it bobbing up and down. Like see that mark bobbing up and down. See that? Goes down, up. I go this way, then it goes down again. So I'm right in there. I'm right at the top dead center, right in that little range right there. I can feel it and I can kind of see it moving on that little mark. And I'll just play with this a little bit until I get it. And I'll have to play with it, kind of hold it in here. I'm not damaging anything because it's soft. It's just cardboard. And I'll just move it. So I go down and go up, go back down, go back up. So my top dead center is like right about there. I can just feel it. It's like right there. Right like that. Now, what I'll do is I'll come out of here. I'm going to mark it. I'm going to mark just a line using my Sharpie. I'm just going to mark a line. Hopefully you can kind of see it. Just like that. That'll come off. Now if I do this, when I'm making adjustments and I kind of hit it, all I got to do is go put it back there. Right? So basically what I just did, obviously, is I just sort of played with it to find the top dead center. And then I got to kind of where I can see this little guy moving up and down. And then once I got it, so it goes up and it kind of, like a pendulum almost. It kind of goes up and it goes back down, up and down. As soon as I kind of got it sort of like right in that up position, I stopped and then I mark it down here. If I'm set there, now I know I can kind of make my adjustments. I can loosen these guys up. I can try to measure them, make my adjustments. And then again, if I hit something or knock something, I just move it back to those lines, and I know I'm in the right spot. All right, so let's take a look at this diagram again. So here's a diagram showing the tappet adjustment. So the feeler gauge is going to go right in between here like this and measure this gap. And again, that's going to be, it's going to be right in here, right inside here like this. Let me get this side over here. There it goes. It's got a little bit too much play in it. What I want to see is, for whatever one you're going to use measuring it, what you want to do is you want to be able to put it through here and drag it through, and you want to kind of feel it kind of dragging on it. You don't want it to bite into it, and you don't want it to be loose. The thing you got to be careful with too is, let me see here, you don't want to pull it through like this, right? You don't want to be pulling it through like that. You want to be pulling it through, you know, as perpendicular as you can to make sure that you get the correct kind of feel on it. Again, if you're going like this, you're going to feel too much friction. You're going to think that it's tighter than it is. So you got to be careful with that. So let me move the engine back over. It's going to be a little bit hard because of the camera angle. Let me check my marks there. They're good. Okay, so again, I'll slide it through here. And I can feel I'm a lot looser, relatively speaking, than what this is measuring. And I think the last time I did this, I was out in the field, and I may have just measured it with a different one, but so I can kind of feel that in there. So I can go ahead, oops, here we go, gravity. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna adjust this to see if I can get it sort of get a little bit tighter. All right, so what you get in the Saito box, I moved my guy there, but it's okay, is they give you a little wrench here, a little spanner, looks like a little spanner, and of course your Allen key. And I'll move this back over here. I don't have to move it just yet. And I'll do this top one first here, and this goes on here. And this is where it gets to be, this is sort of kind of how it gets tricky, because I'm gonna have to loosen this up and then make my adjustment and tighten it down. So I'm just gonna go ahead and loosen that guy up. I'm gonna do this one too since I'm here. Loosen those guys up. Now, and then of course this is the Allen key which makes the adjustment. So this guy goes in here, and this is what turns that little adjusting screw. Now the problem is, like I mentioned before, is then when I go back to tighten this, okay, this is where it gets kind of tricky. When I go to tighten this, put this in here, I have to hold this. Once I get my measurement correct, I have to hold this Allen key obviously perfectly as I tighten this guy back down here. Okay, I didn't make my adjustment, I'm just kind of showing. And the problem is that when you start to kind of tighten down on this, you can kind of drag your, right, you can kind of bring your Allen key with you, kind of bring the set screw with you, so then you'll be a little bit out of adjustment. So you really have to be careful. You really have to hold this as tight and as possible while you tighten this down. And this has to be relatively tight. It's got to be pretty stiff on there. You can't be just kind of just a little bit. You got to make sure that's kind of snug down enough so it doesn't come loose during operation. Okay, so got that guy there. And here we go. Let's see here. It's really hard to do this with just two hands. Oops, let me get my guy back here. Right about there. All right, so I played with this a little bit, so now it's tight. So, in fact, let me do it this way. So see, I'm not going in there right now, and I'm going to loosen this up a little bit. You'll see it just popped in. Now that feels okay to me. I'm going to go ahead and just bring it a little bit. It's really just a little bit. See, now I kind of feel it dragging in there, and I want to make sure that I'm not kind of, again, bending up on this thing. I want to make sure I'm kind of going in, kind of just, yeah, it feels like that's nice. It's sort of a nice drag through there without kind of binding or cutting into it, kind of biting onto it. It's like that, and it's not loose. That's pretty good right there. I like that. Now the problem I have is, and I think I can kind of put this in here, leave it like that. And now I'm going to try to tighten this down without moving it. So I'm put a little bit of back pressure on this guy and kind of bring it. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of turning this one a little bit. The top one, I'm kind of not turning it, but I'm just pressing on it, and then I'm kind of cranking down on the little wrench here. Then I'll go back and I'll feel this. Yeah, it feels pretty good. Okay. And again, I'll check to make sure my mark is in the right location. So let's go ahead and put this in here again. This will kind of help hold it also. So let's go ahead and crank this down a little bit. Okay. Okay, good. All right, so that one's set. Now, if I check I want to do my upper end, the 0.10, which is for the this guy. This should not fit in there. Yeah, and it doesn't. I mean, I could press it in there, I can jam it in there, but I'm not going to do that. It shouldn't. That doesn't go in there. Okay. Cool. And now I'll move on to this next one down here. We'll do the same thing. Put this on here like that. Let me tighten this up a little bit. Okay. Okay, there's that. Put this guy in. Fingers are probably going to be in the way. Check my mark again. See, I like being able to check that mark like that. Okay, so now I'm going to do the other side, which is the exhaust valve. So I'm checking my little marks there. My marks are still in the right place. I'm going to put my little wrench on here. Little tricky with the camera. Put an Allen wrench right in there like this. And now I'm going to feel it. I can feel I'm a little bit on the loose side. Okay. So let me see if I can tighten it down just a little bit. I'll adjust it with the Allen key. Try to turn this. Somewhere right about there. I kind of feel it dragging. Okay. Now the key will be to try to tighten it up. And sometimes with this, it's a little trial and error. You got to try it, set it up, tighten it down a little bit, check it, and if it's off, you're going to have to redo it. I'm thinking I'm pretty good right about there. Okay, so now I'm going to try to, I guess I could try to, kind of on a weird angle here with the feeler gauge. Maybe kind of put it in like that, let it sit there. And here we go. Again, kind of put a little bit of a back pressure on the, can't really see it, but I'll just go ahead and tighten it a little bit. See where I am. Okay. Probably needs to go a little bit tighter. Okay, I tried to adjust my camera angle a little bit better. But, okay, so here's my, needs to be tightened just a little bit more. I'm going to leave this in here. It is flexible, so it can kind of have a little bit of a, I'm going to leave it like that. And tighten this down. Try it right about there. Just want to get it close, and then I'll tighten it up. Yeah, see, that's dragging through there nicely now. Again, I just want to be very gentle with it, try to get it perpendicular. I kind of feel it's dragging nicely. It's not getting bound up, it's not biting, but it's not loose. Again, I can go back to this one over here. Same thing, it's just that it's got a nice kind of, got that nice kind of drag through there. All right, so I think I'm good here. I'm going to go ahead and give it one more check. I'm going to hold this guy here, snug it down. So it's a little bit difficult to do that, just to make sure things don't kind of move on me. All right, so good. There we go. So I think these are set nice. It's like I said, I'm using the 0.003 inch, 3/1000ths of an inch. Okay, before I put the rocker covers back on, I'm going to put a little bit of oil down the push rod here, a couple drops. I'm just using a lighter. This is a Marvel Mystery Oil. Okay, good. I'm going to put my glow plug back in here first, though. Okay, there it is. A little bit, then one little snug turn. Okay, that's good. Okay, so here I am again with my top dead center, and like I mentioned before, if you can kind of see this, is that the rocker arm is a little loose in there. Should be, because there's a little gap in there now. Well, there was a gap before. And again, here's our feeler gauge. Drags nicely in there on both sides. Okay, kind of feel that drag. All right, so that's set. I'm going to go ahead and put the covers back on. Okay, so that's about it for now. I'm not going to do anything else in this video on the engine. My next video on this will be take it outside and run it and try it out. I need to adjust the low and the high speed needle valves and check the RPMs. I'm going to run a tank of fuel through it, just so hopefully it'll be running okay, and then we'll get it out to the field and try it out and give it some flights, take it out for some flights. And I did want to mention that, again, you know, I kind of stumbled through this, and I probably didn't use the best or the perfect terminology to describe everything that I did here. So thanks for kind of following along. And like always, I recommend that you check out other channels, check out other resources, check out the comments that I'm getting, because I get a lot of comments from a lot of people who have a lot of experience, and they offer a lot of insight, and they point out things to me that I learn from, especially when I make mistakes, which happens a lot. And you can read those comments and pick up on a lot of stuff that's very helpful. So I appreciate that. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate everybody who's subscribing. And thanks for watching my channel. And we'll see you next time.